Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the 1001 Movies podcast. This time I'll be talking about the 1964 Soviet Union film Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, directed by Sergei Paradjanov. Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors opens with a short credit sequence dedicating the film to Mikhailo Koispayansky, the author of the novel of the same name. And yes, I am aware that I probably just butchered the pronunciation of his name. The film debuted in 1964, which marked his 100th birthday. His works focused on Ukrainian culture in the early 1800s, which the film celebrates under the rich direction of Sergei Paradjanov. Before I talk about the film itself, and I have quite a bit to say, it's important to note that up to the 1960s, film in the Soviet Union had a rather sad history. Almost all films were socialist realism, pushing forward the ideals of the government. They were primarily documentary in nature, and if this sounds cringe-worthily boring, that's probably why you can't name any Soviet Union pictures, much less admit to seeing one. Prior to Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, director Sergei Paradjanov had made a number of films, but he later claimed that his career as an artist didn't truly begin until 1964, with the making of this film. The film's narrative is straightforward, set in the wilderness of the Carpathian Mountains during the 1800s. Young Ivan, whose father is killed by the small town's wealthiest citizen, falls in love with his father's murderer's daughter, Marishka. Their romance blooms through their early years, but tragically ends when Marishka drowns in a horrible accident. Ivan is wrought with sorrow, but soon finds himself marrying the beautiful young Pelagnia, although his heart remains faithful to Marishka. Stuck in an unhappy marriage, Ivan turns to drink, while his wife finds herself in the arms of the town sorcerer. He places a curse on Ivan after a brawl in a tavern, and the story concludes with Ivan following Marishka's ghost into the wilderness, where he dies. This story is by no means Gone with the Wind, but it's not really the story that counts here. Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors made a mark in Soviet cinema because of the talented direction of Paradjanov. In the film's first scene, Ivan's brother is crushed by a falling tree, and Paradjanov places the camera on top of the tree so that we fall with it as it crashes to the ground. The townsfolk are portrayed as very religious, and the film is filled with religious iconography, some not as subtle as others. For instance, in her death scene, we see Marishka carrying a black sheaf along a cliffside, which struggles from her arms and results in her falling to her death in the water below. Later in morning, Ivan carries a white lamb throughout the wintry countryside. The fact that Marishka drowns seems deliberate, as water is another symbolic element throughout the film. Ivan sees Marishka's reflection in a pool, which results in him searching for her in the forest, and resulting in his death from exposure. Ivan himself is seen being bathed by the village women, both before his wedding and later before his funeral. Paradjanov also makes heavy use of color, a method often used later by other filmmakers. Bertolucci's The Last Emperor comes to mind. Red and gold made many appearances during moments of renewal and rejuvenation, and perhaps most memorable is Paradjanov's decision to make the scenes in which Ivan mourns Marishka in black and white. The film is surprisingly light on dialogue, instead relying on imagery to convey much of the story. Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, also called Wild Horses of Fire in its native land, was widely received upon its release in the Soviet Union, and people flocked to cinemas to experience this new type of film that Paradjanov had crafted for them. Both the cultural and cinematic aspects of the film appealed to many, and it won the Critics' Grand Prize at the Mar del Plata Film Festival in Argentina. The Soviet government, however, was not too keen on Paradjanov's groundbreaking departure from socialist realism, and after he allegedly refused to change the film, he was immediately blacklisted, even receiving jail time. Paradjanov continued making films in the same avant-garde style, including 1969's The Color of Pomegranates, another film listed in 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die, and the subject of another podcast episode. What did I think of it? Well, frankly, I don't know where to start. I have watched 26 films so far for this podcast and have happily maintained an open mind to those that seem slow or rather obscure. I learned all about neorealism with La Ventura and Senso, the expression of socialist ideals with Red Psalm, and the bizarre storytelling pattern of Beau Travail. However, Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, of all 26 movies, is on the very bottom of the list for me. What can I say? The film was a slog. I don't really mind the snail's pace method of the plot, but the direction seemed almost masturbatory, and some of the surreal montages just seemed to carry on for way too long. In some scenes, I felt as though I had already gotten the message, yet Paradjanov continued hammering me over the head with symbolic images, camera tricks, and a soundtrack provided by traditional native folk instruments which served only to grate on my nerves. 20 minutes into the movie, I realized I wasn't in the right frame of mind to watch this and turned it off, saving it for later. I watched the rest of the film begrudgingly then, a few days later, decided to give it one more try before recording this. The final watching was the best, but I still can't really say that it was enjoyable. I still felt as if I was being forced through it, and at a relatively brief running time of 97 minutes, it felt like 3 hours. Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors shall remain in my memory as a landmark in the timeline of Soviet cinema, and shall remain that way. Now, based on the user reviews I've read on IMDb of the film, I'm aware that there are viewers out there who greatly admire this piece of work, and I'd really welcome their input, as part of me still feels as if I'm not doing it justice. This is where email comes in, and I welcome any of you to email me at 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com regarding your thoughts on this movie, or any of the movies I've talked about so far, or even will talk about in future episodes. I'll reserve time during recording to read your email, or at the very least comment on it. As a podcaster, I'd love to try and open the discussion to other voices, as I'm only one person with only one opinion, and sometimes, as is the case with a film like The Outlaw Josie Wales, I may just be in the minority. That's all I have to say about Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. Now tune in next time when we talk about The Garden of the Finzi Continis, the 1970 Italian drama directed by Vittorio De Sica. Be sure to look for the podcast on Facebook, follow me on Twitter via 1001moviespc, or send email again to 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, happy viewing.